The traveling merchant's wagon rolled into Kingman, Arizona territory, on a scorching July afternoon in 1878, and Katherine Cordelia Collins sat on the bench beside her father with a leather-bound book pressed against her chest like a shield. The heat shimmered off the dusty street, making the wooden buildings waver like mirages, but Katherine barely noticed the oppressive temperature because she was lost in the final pages of her novel, her green eyes moving rapidly across the print, even as the wagon jolted over ruts and stones. "For heaven's sake, Katherine, put that damned book down and help me watch for the trading post," her father snapped, his weathered face creased with irritation beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "We have been on the road for 3 weeks, and you have had your nose buried in one book or another the entire time. It is unseemly for a young woman of 22 to be so obsessed with reading." Katherine reluctantly closed the book, but kept her finger marking her place. "Father, I was just finishing the chapter. Besides, what else was there to do while traveling through the desert? You could have mended your dresses or practiced your needlework, or learned something useful about running a household," her father continued, his voice rising with each word. "No man wants a wife whose head is filled with romantic nonsense and adventure stories. You read too many books, Katherine, far too many books. It is high time you put away such childish things and started acting like a proper young lady." Katherine bit her tongue to keep from responding that she had read those very books, because they were far more interesting than the life her father had mapped out for her. Since her mother's death 5 years ago, her father had become increasingly critical of her reading habit, claiming it gave her impractical ideas about life and love. He wanted her to marry a merchant or shopkeeper, someone practical and boring who would provide a stable life. But Katherine dreamed of adventure, of passion, of something more than endless days of domestic drudgery. The wagon lurched to a stop in front of Henderson's trading post, a sturdy building with a false front that made it appear larger than it actually was. Katherine climbed down, clutching her book and a small carpet bag containing 3 more volumes she had carefully hidden from her father's notice. The street was busy with afternoon traffic, miners and cowboys and families going about their business, and Katherine felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation at being in a new town. "You stay here and watch our goods while I go find accommodations," her father ordered, already walking away before Katherine could respond. She stood in the shade of the trading post's awning, grateful to be out of the direct sun, and opened her book again. She had barely read 2 paragraphs when she heard a commotion down the street. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, and then a man came stumbling out of the saloon, pursued by 2 others who were clearly intent on violence. Katherine stepped back against the building, her heart racing, but she could not look away from the scene unfolding before her. The man who had been thrown from the saloon was young and well-dressed, clearly a gambler by his fancy vest, and the cards still clutched in one hand. His pursuers were rough-looking men, miners perhaps, with dirt-stained clothes and anger written across their faces. "Cheating scum," one of them shouted, drawing a knife. "You think we would not notice your marked deck?" The gambler held up his hands, backing away, but Katherine could see he was cornered against a water trough with nowhere to go. Her fingers tightened on her book as she watched, horrified but unable to move or cry out. Then another figure emerged from the shadowed alley beside the saloon, and Katherine's breath caught in her throat. The man was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. He wore buckskin pants and a homespun shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin, with a thick beard covering his jaw. He moved with a predator's grace despite his size, and when he stepped between the gambler and his attackers, the entire street seemed to go quiet. "That is enough," the big man said, his voice a deep rumble that carried despite its calm tone. "Take your grievance to the sheriff if you have one." "This is not your concern, Bennett," one of the miners said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The cheater took our money and we aim to get it back." "Then get the sheriff," the big man repeated, "but there will be no killing in the street today." The two miners exchanged glances, clearly weighing their chances against this mountain of a man. Katherine found herself holding her breath, waiting to see what would happen. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight, and then finally the miners backed down, spitting in the dust and muttering curses as they walked away. The gambler scrambled to his feet, stammering his thanks, but the big man just jerked his head toward the edge of town. "Best you move along too, and if you are going to cheat at cards, be better at it." The gambler did not wait to be told twice. He hurried away, leaving the big man standing alone in the street. Katherine realized she was staring and quickly looked back down at her book, but not before the man's eyes swept across the boardwalk and caught her gaze for just a moment. His eyes were a startling blue, like winter ice, and they seemed to see right through her before he turned and walked back toward the alley. "What are you gawking at?" Her father's voice made Katherine jump. He had returned with a sour expression that suggested he had not found satisfactory lodgings. "Come along. We have a room at the boarding house, though the proprietor is charging highway robbery prices for it." Katherine followed her father down the street, but her mind kept returning to the big man in buckskins. She had read about mountain men in her books, those solitary figures who trapped and hunted in the high country, but she had never actually seen one before. The stories described them as rough and dangerous, barely civilized, but there had been something almost noble about the way he had stopped that fight without violence. The boarding house was a two-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but the room was clean enough, with two narrow beds and a washstand. Katherine's father immediately began complaining about the price, the quality, and the location, but Katherine tuned him out as she unpacked her small trunk. She carefully hid her books beneath her undergarments, knowing her father would confiscate them if he found them. That evening, after a meal of overcooked beef and potatoes in the boarding house dining room, Katherine's father announced his plans. "I will be meeting with the trading post owner and several other merchants tomorrow to discuss supply routes. You will stay here and occupy yourself with appropriate activities. Perhaps the landlady can teach you something useful about cooking or preserving." Katherine nodded dutifully, already planning to slip away and explore the town. She waited until her father had fallen asleep, his snores rattling the thin walls, before she pulled out her current book and lit the oil lamp. The story was a romance set in the Scottish Highlands, and she lost herself in the tale of a lady and a fierce warrior until the lamp oil ran low, and exhaustion pulled her toward sleep. The next morning, Katherine dressed in her simplest calico dress and waited until her father left for his business meetings before she stepped out onto the main street of Kingman. The town was already bustling despite the early hour, and she walked slowly, taking in the sights. There was a general store, a bank, two saloons, a livery stable, and various other businesses crammed along the dusty thoroughfare. At the far end of town, she could see a small church with a white steeple, and beyond that, the desert stretched toward distant purple mountains. Katherine made her way to the trading post, hoping to find something interesting to read. The building was dim and cool inside, packed with goods of every description. Barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, tools, saddles, Guns and hundreds of other items filled every available space. An older man with graying hair stood behind the counter, tallying figures in a ledger. "Help you, miss?" he asked, looking up with a friendly smile. "I was wondering if you have any books for sale," Katherine said hopefully. The man chuckled. "Books, not much call for those out here, I am afraid. Most folks are more interested in practical goods. I have a Bible or two and maybe some almanacs, but that is about it." Katherine tried to hide her disappointment. "I see. Thank you anyway." She was turning to leave when the door opened, and the big man from yesterday walked in, ducking his head to clear the frame. Up close, he was even more imposing than she remembered, and Katherine found herself pressing back against a barrel to give him room to pass. He nodded to her politely, then addressed the shopkeeper. "Morning, Henderson. I need to pick up my supplies. Should be ready by now." "Sure thing, Bennett. I have got everything packed up in the back. Give me a moment to fetch it." Henderson disappeared through a curtained doorway, leaving Katherine and the mountain man alone in the front of the store. The silence stretched uncomfortably, and Katherine clutched her reticule nervously. The man, Bennett, seemed content to wait without speaking, his presence filling the space around him. Finally, curiosity overcame her shyness. "Thank you for what you did yesterday," she said quietly. "Stopping that fight, I mean. That was very brave." Bennett turned his ice-blue gaze on her, and Katherine felt her cheeks flush under his scrutiny. "Was not brave, just necessary. Man did not deserve to die over a card game, even if he was a cheat." His voice was even deeper up close, with a rough quality that suggested he did not use it often. Katherine noticed he spoke more formally than she expected, with better grammar than most of the men she had heard in town. "Still, it was kind of you to intervene," she persisted. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his bearded face. "Kind is not a word most folks use to describe me, miss, but I will take the compliment all the same." Henderson returned before Katherine could respond, struggling under the weight of several large bundles. Bennett took them easily, slinging packs over his shoulders that would have crushed a smaller man. He paid in cash, thanked Henderson, and turned to leave. "Excuse me," Katherine found herself saying, surprising herself with her boldness. "Mr. Bennett, is it? Are you a mountain man?" He paused, looking back at her with those penetrating eyes. "Just Bennett, no mister. And yes, I trap in the high country during winter, hunt and scout the rest of the year." "Why do you ask?" Katherine felt her excitement growing despite her nervousness. "I have read about mountain men in books, but I have never met one before. It must be fascinating, living in the wilderness like that." Bennett's expression was unreadable behind his beard. "It is hard, dangerous work, miss. Not much like the books, I would wager." He studied her for a moment longer, then added, "You are new in town, just passing through?" "Yes, my father is a traveling merchant. We arrived yesterday." Katherine hesitated, then extended her hand in what she hoped was a sophisticated gesture. "Katherine Collins. It is a pleasure to meet you properly." Bennett looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment, and Katherine worried she had committed some social error. Then he carefully shifted his bundles and took her hand in his much larger one, his calloused palm rough against her soft skin. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she quickly withdrew her hand. "Pleasure, Miss Collins," Bennett said, then nodded to Henderson and left, ducking through the doorway and disappearing into the bright morning sunlight. Katherine stood frozen for a moment, her hand still tingling where he had touched it. She had shaken hands with dozens of men in her life, business associates of her father's, but none of them had affected her like that brief contact with the mountain man. "Bennett Thorne is a good man," Henderson said, startling Katherine out of her thoughts. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and reliable. Been coming through Kingman twice a year for the past 5 years or so, always pays his debts and never causes trouble. You could do worse for an acquaintance out here. Katherine felt her cheeks burning again. I was just being polite, she said defensively. Henderson smiled knowingly. Of course, miss. Now, was there anything else I could help you with today? Katherine left the trading post feeling oddly flustered. She spent the rest of the morning exploring Kingman, but her thoughts kept returning to Bennett Thorne. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her curiosity burn even brighter. She wanted to know more about him, about his life in the mountains, about how he had come to be who he was. When she returned to the boarding house for lunch, she found her father in a foul mood. His business negotiations had not gone well, and he took out his frustration on Katherine, criticizing everything from her dress to her posture to the way she held her fork. I saw you this morning, walking around town like some common girl, he said accusingly. What were you thinking, wandering about unescorted? I was just looking at the town, Katherine protested. I did not go anywhere inappropriate. You went to the trading post. The owner mentioned seeing you there talking to some mountain man. Her father's face reddened with anger. Have you lost all sense of propriety? What would people think, seeing you speaking familiarly with such a rough character? Katherine felt her own temper rising. I was simply being polite, father. He helped me by recommending some supplies we might need. The lie came easily, smoothly, born of years of defending her reading habit and any other activity her father deemed improper. Well, you will stay away from him and anyone like him, her father ordered. We will be in this God-forsaken town for at least 2 weeks while I arrange my business affairs. You will spend that time improving yourself, not gallivanting around and talking to unsuitable men. Is that clear? Katherine nodded mutely, but inside she was seething. She was 22 years old, not a child to be ordered about. But she had learned long ago that arguing with her father only made things worse. Better to appear compliant and then do as she wished when he was not watching. That evening, after her father had left to play cards at one of the saloons, Katherine sat by the window of their room and read by the fading light. She had just reached an exciting part of her novel when she heard voices in the street below. Glancing out, she saw Bennett Thorne standing near the livery stable, talking with an older man she recognized as the stable owner. On impulse, Katherine grabbed a shawl and slipped out of the room, hurrying down the stairs and out into the warm evening air. She walked casually toward the stable, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Bennett looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face. The stable owner nodded to her politely and then excused himself, leaving them alone in the shadowed street. Miss Collins, Bennett said, his voice carefully neutral. Is something wrong? No, I just saw you from my window and thought I would say hello. Katherine realized how forward that sounded and quickly added, I mean, I was just taking an evening walk and happened to see you. Bennett studied her for a long moment, and Katherine felt as if he could see right through her lie. But he did not call her on it, instead gesturing toward the mountains visible in the distance. Fine evening for a walk, he said simply. Not too hot once the sun goes down. Katherine moved to stand beside him, following his gaze toward the purple peaks. Is that where you live, up in those mountains? Sometimes. I have a cabin about 20 miles north up in the high country, but I move around a lot, following the game and the seasons. He glanced down at her. Not the kind of life most folks would find appealing. It sounds wonderful to me, Katherine said honestly. All that freedom, all that space. No one telling you what to do or how to behave. Something in her voice must have betrayed her feelings because Bennett's expression softened slightly. Seems like you know something about being told what to do. Katherine laughed bitterly. My father thinks I should spend my time learning domestic skills and finding a suitable husband. He despises that I love to read, says it fills my head with nonsense and makes me unsuitable for proper society. What kind of books do you read? Bennett asked, and Katherine was surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. All kinds. Novels, mostly. Adventures, romances, stories about far-off places. My mother loved books too before she died. She used to read to me every night. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at the memory. Father burned most of her books after she passed, said they were taking up too much space. But I saved a few and I have been collecting more whenever I can. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Bennett said quietly, "My mother taught me to read, back before she died when I was 10. She was educated, came from a good family back east. She used to say that books were windows into other lives, other ways of seeing the world." Katherine turned to look at him in surprise. "Your mother taught you, but I thought mountain men were all unlettered and rough." Bennett's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile beneath his beard. "Most are. But my mother was determined I would have at least some education, even after we moved to the frontier. She taught me reading, writing, arithmetic, even some history and poetry before the fever took her." "I am sorry," Katherine said softly. "It must have been hard losing her so young." "It was a long time ago." Bennett's voice was gruff, but Katherine could hear the old pain beneath it. "My father was a trapper, could not read a word. After Ma died, he did his best to raise me, but he was gone most of the time. I learned the wilderness from him, learned to survive. The reading and such, that was all Ma's doing." "Do you still read?" Katherine asked hopefully. Bennett shook his head. "Have not had much opportunity. Books are heavy to carry in the mountains and expensive besides. I make do with old newspapers when I can get them, sometimes a dime novel if I find one. But it has been years since I read anything proper." An idea was forming in Katherine's mind, wild and impractical but too appealing to ignore. "I have books with me," she said quickly. "Several of them. I could lend you one if you would like." Bennett looked at her with surprise. "That is kind of you, Miss Collins, but I would not want to impose. Besides, I am heading back up into the mountains tomorrow. I only came down to get supplies." Katherine felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Oh, I see. But," Bennett continued, his tone thoughtful, "I will be back through Kingman in about a week. If you are still here then, maybe you could lend me something for my next trip out." Katherine's spirits lifted immediately. "Yes, of course. I would be happy to. Do you have any preference?" "Adventure, romance, mystery. Anything would be fine," Bennett said, and there was definite warmth in his voice now. "I am not particular, just something to pass the evening hours." They talked for a while longer, Katherine telling him about some of her favorite books, and Bennett sharing stories about life in the mountains. He spoke of tracking elk through deep snow, of watching the seasons change from his cabin porch, of nights so clear and cold that the stars seemed close enough to touch. Katherine listened, entranced, imagining herself in those wild places. Finally, Bennett glanced at the darkening sky and said, "You should get back, Miss Collins. Your father will be worried." Katherine wanted to protest that her father would not notice her absence as long as she was back before him, but she recognized the dismissal for what it was. Bennett Thorne was not the kind of man to compromise a young woman's reputation, even by accident. "Thank you for talking with me," she said sincerely. "And I will have a book ready for you when you return." Bennett nodded, then surprised her by saying, "Thank you, Miss Collins." It was nice to talk about books again. Been a long time since I had that pleasure. Katherine returned to the boarding house walking on air, her mind spinning with the conversation. Bennett Thorne was nothing like what she had expected from a mountain man. Yes, He was rough-looking and clearly dangerous when he needed to be, but there was intelligence in his eyes and thoughtfulness in his words. He was educated, or at least partially so, and he appreciated books. The discovery felt like finding water in the desert. The next week passed with agonizing slowness. Catherine's father kept her busy with errands and forced domestic lessons from the boarding house landlady, but her mind was always partly elsewhere, wondering when Bennett would return. She spent hours deciding which book to lend him, finally settling on a collection of adventure stories she thought he might enjoy. She also found herself thinking about Bennett himself far more than was probably appropriate. She remembered the way his blue eyes had softened when he talked about his mother, the rough gentleness of his calloused hand holding hers, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his homespun shirt. Sometimes at night, she would lie awake imagining what it would be like to see his cabin in the mountains, to watch the seasons change from that porch he had described. "You are wool gathering again." Her father snapped one afternoon when she failed to respond to a question. "Your head is always in the clouds, Katherine. You need to pay attention to practical matters." Katherine bit back a sharp retort and forced herself to focus on the inventory her father was conducting. But inside, she was counting the days until Bennett's return. 8 days after their conversation, Katherine was sitting on the boarding house porch with her book when she heard a familiar deep voice call her name. She looked up to see Bennett Thorne leading his horse down the street, a string of pelts tied to his saddle. Her heart leaped in her chest, and she barely remembered to mark her place before hurrying down the steps to meet him. "Mr. Thorne, you are back," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, Bennett, you said just Bennett." "I did." He was smiling beneath his beard. She could tell by the crinkles around his eyes. "And I see you have that book ready." Katherine had been carrying the book with her everywhere for the past 3 days, afraid of missing him. She pulled it from her pocket now, holding it out. "These are adventure stories, tales of exploration and survival. I thought you might enjoy them." Bennett took the book carefully, handling it as if it were made of glass. His fingers traced the embossed cover, and Katherine saw genuine pleasure in his expression. "Thank you, Miss Collins. I will take good care of it and return it when I come back through in a few weeks." "There is no rush," Katherine assured him. "And please call me Katherine. Miss Collins sounds so formal." Bennett looked uncomfortable. "Would not be proper me calling you by your given name." "Your father would not approve." "My father does not approve of much I do," Katherine said with more bitterness than she intended. "But if it makes you uncomfortable, then Miss Collins is fine." They stood awkwardly for a moment, and then Bennett said, "I should be going. Got a long ride ahead of me, but thank you again for the book. I will read it carefully." Katherine watched him ride out of town, the book tucked safely in his saddlebag, and felt an unexpected sense of loss. She had only spoken with him twice, but somehow Bennett Thorne had become important to her, a connection to something beyond her narrow, restricted life. The next 3 weeks were even harder than the first had been. Katherine's father's business affairs were not going well, and his temper grew shorter by the day. He found fault with everything Katherine did and spent most evenings drinking at the saloon and returning in a foul mood. Katherine retreated into her books, reading by candlelight and dreaming of mountain cabins and wide open spaces. When Bennett finally returned, it was late afternoon, and Katherine was helping the landlady hang laundry in the yard behind the boarding house. She heard the landlady call out a greeting to someone and turned to see Bennett striding toward them, looking trail-worn and tired but carrying himself with that same easy confidence. "Miss Collins," he said, nodding to her politely, "I have your book." He handed it to her, and Katherine saw that he had kept it wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the elements. The pages were clean and uncreased, clearly treated with great care. "Did you enjoy it?" she asked eagerly. Bennett's face lit up in a way she had not seen before, transforming his rough features. "I did. Very much. The story about the Lewis and Clark expedition was particularly good, made me think about my own travels, though mine are not nearly so grand." The landlady had discreetly returned to the house, leaving them alone in the yard. Katherine seized the opportunity. "Would you like another book? I have several with me." "I would," Bennett said, "but I wonder if I could ask something else of you as well." Katherine's curiosity sparked. "Of course. What is it?" Bennett shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable despite his size. "I was wondering if you might be willing to read to me sometime. When I am in town, I mean. It has been so long since I heard anyone read aloud, and my mother used to do it all the time." "I know it is an odd request." "No," Katherine interrupted quickly, her heart racing with excitement. "No, it is not odd at all. I would love to read to you. My mother used to read to me too, and I miss it terribly." Relief washed over Bennett's face. "Thank you. I did not want to presume, but the nights in the mountains get long sometimes, and I have been thinking how nice it would be to hear a story read properly." They made arrangements to meet at the edge of town the next evening, at a spot near the river where there was some shade and privacy. Katherine spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation, carefully selecting a book she thought Bennett would enjoy and practicing passages aloud to make sure she read them well. Her father was in one of his dark moods at dinner, complaining about the merchants who would not give him favorable terms and the general backwardness of Arizona Territory. Katherine listened with half an ear, nodding at appropriate moments but thinking about the next evening. "Are you even listening to me?" her father demanded suddenly. "I swear, Katherine, you are the most useless daughter a man could have. Your head is always somewhere else, lost in your damned books and daydreams." Something in Katherine snapped. Maybe it was the weeks of constant criticism, or the prospect of returning to their traveling life without ever seeing Bennett again, or just the accumulated weight of years of her father's disappointment. Whatever it was, she found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Maybe if you ever treated me like an adult instead of a child, I would pay more attention to what you say. Maybe if you did not criticize everything I do and try to control every moment of my life, I would want to be here listening to you complain." Her father's face turned purple with rage. "How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I have done for you, feeding you and clothing you and dragging you along on my business trips because you are too incompetent to stay home alone." "I am 22 years old," Katherine shot back, her own anger rising. "Most women my age are married with children, running their own households. But you keep me trapped like a child because you are afraid of being alone." Her father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment Katherine thought he might strike her, something he had never done before. But instead he turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Katherine sat shaking, shocked by her own outburst, but also feeling strangely liberated. She had never spoken to her father that way before, had always swallowed her frustrations and tried to be the dutiful daughter he wanted. But she was tired of pretending, tired of living according to his narrow expectations. The landlady appeared in the doorway, concern written on her face. "Are you all right, dear?" I heard shouting. "I am fine," Katherine said, though her voice trembled. "Just a disagreement with my father." The older woman nodded sympathetically. "He is a difficult man, your father. I have seen his type before, trying to keep their daughters small so they never have to face the emptiness in their own lives. You are a smart girl, Katherine. Do not let him crush that out of you." Katherine thanked her and retreated to her room, but she could not settle. She kept expecting her father to return and continue the argument, but hours passed, and he did not appear. Finally, she fell into restless sleep, dreaming of mountains and freedom and ice-blue eyes. The next morning, her father was coldly polite, speaking to her only when necessary and otherwise ignoring her presence. Katherine did not try to apologize or smooth things over. She was done pretending that everything was fine. That evening, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Katherine told the landlady she was going for a walk and slipped out with her book hidden beneath her shawl. She made her way to the meeting spot Bennett had described, a grove of cottonwood trees along the river that provided shade and privacy. Bennett was already there, sitting on a fallen log and watching the water flow past. He stood when he saw her approach, and Katherine noticed he had cleaned up, his hair still damp and his shirt looking freshly washed. The gesture touched her, this rough mountain man making an effort to be presentable. "Evening," he said, his voice warm. "I was not sure you would come." "I said I would," Katherine replied, settling onto the log. "I brought one of my favorites if you would like to hear it." For the next hour, Katherine read aloud while Bennett listened, his eyes half closed and a look of contentment on his face. The story was a historical novel set in medieval England, full of knights and quests and courtly love. Katherine put all her emotion into the reading, changing her voice for different characters and modulating her tone to match the action. When she finally stopped to rest her voice, Bennett opened his eyes and said quietly, "That was wonderful. You read beautifully, Katherine." The use of her first name sent a thrill through her, even though she had given him permission weeks ago. Coming from his lips in that deep, rough voice, her name sounded different, special. "Thank you," she said softly. "I used to read to my mother when she was ill near the end. It was one of the few things that seemed to comfort her." "Your mother would be proud of you," Bennett said. "Anyone can see you are intelligent and capable, no matter what your father says." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "About my father? I have ears," Bennett said simply. "And people talk in small towns. The landlady mentioned you and your father had a falling out." "I am sorry for that." Katherine found herself telling him everything, about the years of criticism and control, about her father's determination to crush her love of reading, about last night's argument. Bennett listened without interrupting, his presence solid and reassuring. "Sounds like you have been carrying a heavy load," he said when she finished. "Your father, he is scared. Scared of losing you, scared of being alone. Fear makes people mean sometimes." "That does not excuse how he treats me," Katherine said. "No, it does not," Bennett agreed. "But understanding might help you figure out what to do about it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the river and the evening birds. Finally, Bennett said, "Would you be willing to read to me again?" "I leave for the mountains tomorrow, but I will be back through in 3 weeks or so. Maybe we could do this again then." "I would like that very much," Katherine said, meaning it with her whole heart. Over the following months, a pattern developed. Bennett would come to town every few weeks for supplies, and they would meet by the river. Katherine would read to him for an hour or two, and they would talk about the stories and about their lives. Slowly, carefully, a friendship developed between them, and then something deeper. Katherine found herself thinking about Bennett constantly, counting the days until his return, dreaming about his smile and his voice, and the way he looked at her, as if she were the most interesting person in the world. He listened when she talked, remembered details she mentioned, asked thoughtful questions. He treated her like an intelligent adult, not a child or an ornament. For his part, Bennett began to reveal more of himself. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the beauty and hardship of that existence. He spoke of his dreams of having a real home someday, Not just a rough cabin, but a proper house where he could put down roots. He mentioned how lonely he had been before meeting her, how their evenings by the river had become the brightest part of his existence. Catherine's father noticed the change in her, though he did not know the cause. She seemed happier, more confident, less willing to be cowed by his criticism. He did not like it, but his business affairs kept him too busy to monitor her every movement. And besides, the landlady had proven herself to be an ally who would cover for Katherine when needed. It was early October when things came to a head. Katherine had been reading to Bennett by the river, a romance novel this time, and as she finished a particularly passionate scene, she looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding. "What is it?" Bennett took a deep breath, his massive hands clenching into fists. "I am falling in love with you. I probably have been for months, but I did not want to say anything. You deserve better than a rough mountain man with no real prospects. But I cannot keep pretending these feelings do not exist." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Bennett, I am in love with you too. I have been for so long, but I thought you only saw me as a friend." In an instant he was beside her, his large hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "How could I see you as anything less than extraordinary? You are intelligent, kind, brave, beautiful. You have made me feel alive again after years of just existing." Then he was kissing her, and Katherine melted into his embrace. His beard was soft against her skin, his lips gentle despite his obvious passion. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, and felt the solid strength of his body against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer you," he said quietly. "A cabin in the mountains, a hard life, long winters, but I would spend every day trying to make you happy. I would never try to change you or control you or dim your light." "That sounds perfect," Katherine whispered. "But Bennett, we have a problem. My father would never approve. He would see you as unsuitable, and he controls my life. I have no money of my own, nowhere to go." Bennett pulled back to look at her seriously. "Are you saying you want this, want us? Because if you do, we will find a way. I have some money saved, enough to start a life, and I am not afraid of your father or anyone else." Katherine thought about her options. She could return to her old life, traveling with her father, gradually withering under his constant criticism until she became a bitter old maid. Or she could take a chance on love, on freedom, on the kind of life she had only read about in books. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want this. I want you. I want a life where I can breathe and think and be myself." They began to make plans, keeping their meetings secret and careful. Bennett would finish his next trip into the mountains, sell his furs, and return with enough money to get them to California where they could be married. Katherine would gather her few possessions and be ready to leave at a moment's notice. But secrets have a way of coming out, and Katherine's father was not as oblivious as she had hoped. One evening, about 2 weeks after Katherine and Bennett had declared their feelings, her father confronted her in their room. His face was red with anger, and Katherine smelled alcohol on his breath. "The landlady tells me you have been sneaking off to meet a man," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That mountain man, Bennett Thorne. Is this true?" Katherine lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes, it is true. Bennett and I have been meeting to read together. He enjoys literature and intelligent conversation, unlike most of the men you think are suitable for me." Her father's hand shot out and gripped her arm painfully. "You have been disgracing yourself with that savage. Meeting him alone, letting him touch you. Do you know what people will say when they find out?" "He is not a savage," Katherine said, trying to pull away. "He is kind and educated, and he treats me with respect, and we have not done anything disgraceful. We just talk and I read to him." "Lies," her father spat. "No man spends time with a woman for conversation alone. He has been taking advantage of you, filling your head with romantic nonsense, and you have been too stupid to see it." Anger flared in Catherine's chest. "The only person who has taken advantage of me is you. You have spent years trying to control me, to make me into something I am not. But I am done letting you dictate my life. I love Bennett and he loves me, and we are going to be together whether you approve or not." The slap came so fast Katherine did not have time to avoid it. The force of it knocked her sideways, and she tasted blood where her lips split against her teeth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard her father shouting, "You ungrateful little fool! After everything I have done for you, this is how you repay me. Running off with some wilderness savage who will probably get you killed or leave you pregnant and alone in some God-forsaken cabin." Katherine touched her bleeding lip, staring at her father with a mixture of shock and anger. He had never hit her before, no matter how angry he got. The violence seemed to shock him too, because he stepped back, his face draining of color. "Katherine, I did not mean." "Get out," Katherine said, her voice shaking but firm. "Get out right now." Her father hesitated, then turned and left, slamming the door behind him. Katherine sank onto her bed, trembling with reaction. Her lip was swelling, and she could feel the bruise forming on her cheek where his hand had connected. But worse than the physical pain was the knowledge that things could never go back to the way they had been, not that she wanted them to. The landlady came knocking a few minutes later, her face tight with concern. "I heard shouting." "Are you all right, child?" Katherine let her in, and the older woman gasped when she saw Katherine's face. "That bastard hit you. I should call the sheriff." "No," Katherine said quickly. "That will only make things worse. But I need to get a message to Bennett." "Can you help me?" The landlady nodded firmly. "Of course. What do you need?" Katherine quickly wrote a note explaining what had happened and asking Bennett to come as soon as he could. The landlady promised to get it to him through the stable owner, who knew where Bennett's cabin was located. The next 2 days were tense. Katherine's father avoided her, spending his time at the saloon or with his merchant contacts. Katherine stayed in her room mostly, packing her few belongings and trying to figure out what to do. She had no money, no resources, and legally she was still under her father's authority until she married. Bennett arrived on the 3rd day, riding into town hard and fast. The landlady came to get Katherine, and she hurried down to find him waiting in the yard, his face thunderous when he saw her bruised cheek. "He hit you," Bennett said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Where is he?" "Bennett, no," Katherine said, grabbing his arm. "I do not want you to fight him. I just want to leave, to be away from him." Bennett looked at her, and she saw the effort it took him to control his anger. "Are you sure? Because I would be happy to have a conversation with him about how real men treat women." "I am sure," Katherine said. "Please just take me away from here. We can leave right now today. I do not care where we go as long as it is away from him." Bennett studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. Get your things. We will go to my cabin for now until we can figure out our next move. It is not fancy, but it is safe and private." Katherine ran back to her room and grabbed the bag she had already packed. As she came back down, she saw her father standing in the street, having apparently just returned from wherever he had been. He saw Bennett's horse and Katherine with her bag, and his face twisted with fury. "Where do you think you are going?" he demanded, starting toward them. Bennett stepped between Katherine and her father, his sheer size and presence making the older man stop in his tracks. "She is coming with me, and you are not going to stop her." "The hell I am not," Katherine's father blustered. "She is my daughter, and she is not going anywhere with you, you ignorant savage." "I am not a child," Katherine said, stepping around Bennett to face her father. "I am a grown woman and I am choosing to leave with Bennett. You cannot stop me." Her father looked past her to Bennett, his face mottling with rage. "What have you done to her? What lies have you filled her head with?" "I have not filled her head with anything," Bennett said calmly, though Katherine could feel the tension in his body. "Katherine knows her own mind. She has chosen to leave and I am taking her somewhere safe." "Safe? You are dragging her off to your cabin like some kind of kidnapper." "I will have the sheriff on you." "The sheriff will want to know why your daughter has a bruised face," Bennett said, his voice turning cold. "And why she is so desperate to leave that she is willing to go into the wilderness with a man she has only known a few months." Katherine's father seemed to deflate slightly, realizing he had no good answers to those questions. He looked at Katherine, and for a moment she saw something like regret in his eyes. "Katherine, please," he said, his voice softer. "Do not do this. You are throwing your life away on some fantasy. Come back with me and we will forget all this happened." Katherine felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but she steeled herself against it. "I am not throwing my life away, Father. I am finally starting to live it. You read too many books, you always told me. You said I was filling my head with impractical dreams, but those books taught me that there is more to life than just surviving. They taught me that I deserve to be happy, to be respected, to be loved." She moved closer to her father, looking him in the eye. "Bennett sees who I really am and loves me for it. He does not try to change me or control me or make me smaller so he feels bigger. I am sorry I cannot be the daughter you wanted, but I have to live my own life now." Before her father could respond, she turned and walked to Bennett's horse. He lifted her into the saddle with ease, then mounted behind her, his arms coming around her in a protective embrace. As they rode out of Kingman, Katherine looked back once to see her father standing alone in the street, looking smaller and older than she had ever seen him. The ride to Bennett's cabin took several hours, winding up into the mountains through pine forests and across rushing streams. Katherine had never been on a horse for so long, and she was grateful for Bennett's solid presence behind her, keeping her steady and safe. He did not talk much during the ride, focused on navigating the rough trail, but his arms around her felt like a promise of protection. They arrived at the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was a simple structure, built of logs and nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and there was a small corral beside the cabin where Bennett kept his horses. "It is not much," Bennett said as he helped her down from the horse. "Just one room and a loft, but it is solid and warm." Katherine looked around, breathing in the clean mountain air. The silence was profound after the noise of town, broken only by birdsong and the whisper of wind through the trees. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. Bennett relaxed slightly at her words. He showed her inside, where a stone fireplace dominated one wall and simple but sturdy furniture filled the space. There was a bed in one corner, neatly made, and a ladder leading up to a loft that appeared to be used for storage. The cabin was scrupulously clean, which surprised Katherine until she remembered that a man who could read medieval history was probably capable of keeping a tidy house. "You can have the bed," Bennett said, already moving to gather blankets. "I will sleep by the fire." "Bennett," Katherine said softly, "we do not have to maintain those kinds of proprieties anymore. I came here willingly, knowing full well what people will think. I am not worried about my reputation." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I brought you here to keep you safe, Katherine, not to take advantage of the situation. We will do this properly, get married as soon as we can arrange it. Until then, I will treat you with the respect you deserve." Katherine felt her heart swell with love for this rough, honorable man. She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his broad chest. "I love you, Bennett Thorne." His arms came around her, holding her close. "I love you too, Katherine Collins, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving it." They settled into a routine over the following days. Bennett taught Katherine the basics of mountain living, how to fetch water from the nearby stream, how to cook on the fireplace, how to recognize animal tracks and dangerous plants. Katherine was a quick learner, and she found she enjoyed the physical work and the sense of accomplishment that came with mastering new skills. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Katherine would read aloud from her carefully saved books. Bennett would listen, sometimes with his eyes closed, sometimes watching her face as she brought the words to life. After the reading, they would talk for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds and hearts. "Tell me about your mother," Katherine asked one night. "What was she like?" Bennett stared into the fire, his expression distant. "She was gentle, but strong. She came from Boston, from a wealthy family, but she fell in love with my father and followed him west despite her family's objections. They disowned her for it, but she never regretted her choice, or at least she never said she did." "She sounds brave," Katherine said. She was. "And she made sure I understood that education was not just for city folk. She used to say that an empty mind was a tragedy, no matter where you lived or what you did for a living." He smiled slightly. "She would have liked you. You remind me of her in some ways, that same determination to be who you are no matter what anyone else thinks." "I wish I could have met her," Katherine said softly. "Me too." Bennett reached over and took her hand. "But I think she would be happy knowing I found someone like you." 3 weeks after Katherine arrived at the cabin, they rode down to a small town about 30 miles away where no one knew them. The circuit preacher was there, and they were married in a simple ceremony with the preacher's wife and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Katherine wore her best dress, slightly wrinkled from being packed, and Bennett had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair. They exchanged simple gold bands that Bennett had purchased months ago, carrying them in his pocket like a talisman of hope. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Bennett kissed Katherine with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. She was Mrs. Katherine Thorne now, bound to this mountain man by law and love and choice. That night, in their marriage bed back at the cabin, Bennett made love to his wife with a combination of passion and gentleness that left Katherine breathless and amazed. He treated her like she was precious, something to be cherished and protected, and Katherine felt herself blooming under his attention like a flower long denied sunlight. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Katherine felt complete in a way she never had before. "Read to me," Bennett murmured against her hair. "I want to fall asleep hearing your voice." So Katherine reached for the book on the bedside table and read by lamplight, her husband's arms around her, until both their breathing slowed and deepened into sleep. The months that followed were not always easy. Winter came early to the mountains that year, bringing snow and bitter cold. The cabin felt much smaller when they could not go outside for days at a time. They ran low on supplies and had to ration carefully. Katherine struggled with homesickness sometimes, missing not her father but the idea of a normal life with neighbors and friends. But through it all, their love sustained them. Bennett was patient with her when she felt overwhelmed, teaching her the skills she needed to survive the harsh conditions. Katherine kept their spirits up with her reading and her quick mind, finding ways to make their small space feel like home. One evening in late December, as snow fell heavily outside and they sat by the fire, Bennett said quietly, "I have been thinking we should move to California in the spring." Get a piece of land, build a real house, maybe start a farm or ranch. This life, just the two of us in the mountains, it was fine when I was alone, but I want better for you, for us." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "But you love the mountains. I do not want you to give up your life for me." "I am not giving anything up," Bennett said firmly. "I am choosing a different life, one where we can have a real future, where we can have children if we are blessed that way, where you can have friends and neighbors, where we can be part of a community." He took her hand. "The mountains will always be here and we can visit, but I want to build something lasting with you, not just survive winter to winter." Katherine felt tears in her eyes. "Are you sure? I know how much this place means to you." "You mean more," Bennett said simply. "You always will." They spent the rest of the winter making plans, poring over maps and dreaming of their future home. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and turning the mountains green, they packed up the cabin and headed west. The journey to California took several weeks, following established trails and camping under the stars. Katherine discovered she had a talent for wilderness travel, and Bennett was proud of how capable she had become. They reached the Sacramento Valley in early summer and found a piece of land near a growing town called Marysville. The property had a small creek running through it, good soil, and timber for building. Bennett used his savings to make the down payment, and they set up a tent while he began construction on a house. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way Katherine had never experienced before. She helped where she could, and when Bennett hired some local men to assist with the heavy lifting, she cooked for the crew and kept everyone supplied with water and encouragement. The house took shape slowly. A solid two-story structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. Bennett built Katherine a special room just for her books, with shelves from floor to ceiling and a comfortable chair by the window. When she saw it for the first time, she cried with happiness. "You deserve a place for your treasures," Bennett said, holding her close. "And maybe someday, our children will sit in this room and you will read to them like your mother read to you." By autumn, they were moved into the house and Bennett had started clearing land for crops. They met their neighbors, a mix of miners, farmers, and merchants, and gradually became part of the community. Katherine joined the ladies' sewing circle, partly because it was expected and partly because she genuinely enjoyed the companionship of other women. She was careful not to mention her father or her past, letting people assume she and Bennett had married back east before coming west. Bennett found work as a guide and scout for settlers coming over the mountains, using his knowledge of wilderness survival to help others make the journey safely. The work paid well and allowed him to spend winters at home with Katherine. Their first child, a son they named James, was born in the spring of 1880, delivered by a midwife while Bennett paced anxiously outside. When he finally came in and saw Katherine holding their baby, tears streamed down his bearded face. "You did it," he said in wonder. "You beautiful, strong woman, you did it." Katherine smiled tiredly. "We did it. This is our son, Bennett, our family." Little James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, after Bennett's mother, and then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The house filled with noise and laughter, with the sound of running feet and childish voices. Bennett proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving, teaching his children everything he knew about the wilderness while Katherine taught them to read and love books. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Katherine and Bennett would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains in the distance. She would read aloud from whatever book had caught her interest, and Bennett would listen with the same rapt attention he had shown that first night by the river in Kingman. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked one such evening. "Giving up your life in the mountains for all this?" Bennett pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I always dreamed of but never thought I would have. A good woman, healthy children, a home worth protecting. You gave me that, Katherine. You gave it to me too," she said softly. "When my father said I read too many books, he meant it as a criticism, as proof that I was not fit for real life. But those books taught me to dream, to believe that life could be bigger and better than what I had. And then you came along and said I could read to you nightly, like it was a gift instead of a fault. You made me feel valuable just for being myself." "You are valuable," Bennett said firmly. "The most valuable thing in my life, and I will spend every day we have left proving it to you." Years passed in a blur of seasons, of planting and harvest, of children growing and changing. James grew tall and strong like his father, though he had his mother's love of learning. He eventually went to college in San Francisco, studying engineering. Sarah inherited her father's skill with animals and her mother's intelligence, and she married a local rancher and started her own family nearby. Thomas became a teacher, inspired by his mother's patient lessons, and opened a school in Marysville. Katherine and Bennett grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by time and hard work. But the love between them never dimmed. They still read together in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same wonder and gratitude they had felt that day by the river. When they became grandparents, Katherine would gather the little ones in her book room and read to them just as her mother had read to her, just as she had read to Bennett all those years ago. The children loved these sessions, begging for just one more chapter, just one more story. Bennett would sometimes join them, sitting in the back and listening with a smile on his weathered face. One evening, when they were both in their 60s and their children were grown with families of their own, Bennett and Katherine sat on their porch watching another sunset. Katherine had been reading from a new novel, but she set it aside to simply enjoy the moment. "I got a letter today," she said quietly, "from a lawyer in Kingman. My father passed away last month." Bennett looked at her, concerned. "How do you feel about that?" Katherine considered the question. "Sad, I suppose, but not the way you might expect. I am sad for him, for the life he chose to live, full of anger and control and loneliness. But I am not sad for myself. I grieved for him years ago when I realized he would never change, never accept me as I was. Did he leave you anything?" Bennett asked. "The lawyer said there was a small inheritance and a letter." Katherine pulled an envelope from her pocket. "I have not read it yet. Part of me does not want to, in case it is just more criticism and disappointment." "Want me to read it first?" Bennett offered. Katherine shook her head. "No, I should do it." She opened the envelope with shaking hands and unfolded the single page inside. Her eyes moved over the words, and Bennett watched as tears began to stream down her face. "Katherine, what is it?" He put his arm around her shoulders. "He apologized," Katherine said, her voice choked with emotion. "He wrote this a few months before he died. He says he was wrong about everything, that he let his fear and grief over my mother turn him into someone cruel. He says he heard about my life out here, about you and our children, and he is glad I found happiness even if it was not the life he wanted for me." She wiped her eyes. "He says he is proud of me, Bennett. He never said that when he was alive, but he wrote it down so I would know." Bennett held her while she cried, tears of grief and relief and forgiveness all mixed together. "I am glad he found some peace at the end," he said softly. "And I am glad you have those words, even if they came late." "Me too," Katherine whispered. "Me too." As the years continued to pass, Katherine and Bennett watched their family grow and flourish. They saw grandchildren grow up and go to college, get married, start careers. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, supported their children through hard times, and rejoiced with them in good times. Their house remained the center of family gatherings, always full of noise and love and, of course, books. Katherine kept adding to her library, though now she had to be selective because the shelves were nearly full. She joined the town's book club and eventually helped establish a lending library in Marysville, donating many of her own volumes to get it started. She became known as the woman to see if you wanted book recommendations or needed help learning to read. Bennett stayed active well into his 70s, still guiding the occasional expedition into the mountains and helping younger men learn wilderness skills. He remained physically powerful even as his hair went white and his face became lined with age. People respected him, both for his knowledge and for his quiet, steady presence. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together what seemed like half the town. There were speeches and toasts, gifts and laughter, and at the end of the evening their oldest son James stood up to say a few words. "My parents' love story is one that has always inspired me," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "My mother was told she read too many books, that her love of learning was a fault to be corrected. But my father saw that love of books as a treasure, something precious to be nurtured and celebrated. He said she could read to him nightly, and that simple acceptance, that willingness to value her for who she truly was, became the foundation of a love that has lasted 3 decades and counting." He raised his glass. "To Bennett and Katherine Thorne, who proved that the right person will love everything about you, even the things other people call faults. May their love continue to inspire us all." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Katherine and Bennett stood together, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling through tears. Later, when the party had ended and they were alone in their bedroom, Bennett held Katherine close and murmured, "Best 30 years of my life." "Mine too," Katherine agreed. "Though I have to say, the next 30 are looking pretty good as well." Bennett laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I do not know if we will get 30 more, my love, but however many years we have left, I plan to treasure every single one." They kept that promise to each other. Even as their bodies slowed and their steps became less certain, their love remained constant. They still read together every evening, though now Katherine's eyes sometimes needed help from Bennett's reading glasses, and his hearing was not as sharp as it once was. They adapted, growing old together with grace and good humor. When Katherine was 75 and Bennett 78, he fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For weeks Katherine nursed him, barely sleeping, reading to him whenever he was awake enough to listen. Their children came to help, bringing grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, all wanting to spend time with the patriarch of their family. Bennett rallied eventually, his strong constitution pulling him through, but the illness left him weakened. He could no longer work as he once had, and he spent most of his time in the chair by the fire, content to watch the world go by through the window. "Read to me," he would say to Katherine, and she would pick up whatever book had caught her interest and read until her voice grew tired. Sometimes the grandchildren would take over, and Bennett would listen with the same focused attention he had always shown, treasuring these moments of story and connection. They made it to their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. The house was paid off long ago, their children were all successful and happy, and their legacy was secure. On quiet evenings, they would reminisce about their long journey together, from that first meeting in Henderson's trading post to the life they had built in California. "Do you remember that day by the river in Kingman?" Katherine asked one evening. "When you first asked me to read to you." "I remember everything about those days," Bennett said softly. You looked so beautiful sitting in the shade, that book in your hands like it was the most precious thing in the world. And when you read, your voice brought the words to life in a way I had not heard since my mother died. I think I started falling in love with you right then, though I did not want to admit it. I fell for you when you defended that gambler, Katherine admitted. Seeing a man that strong and capable choose peace over violence, it showed me who you really were beneath the rough exterior. And then, when you said you wanted me to read to you, when you valued my education instead of criticizing it, I knew you were special. Your father was a fool, Bennett said, saying you read too many books, as if being intelligent and curious was something shameful. Those books made you who you are, Katherine. They taught you to dream, to hope, to believe in possibilities, and that belief brought you to me. The books brought us together, Katherine agreed, but it was your heart that made me stay. Your kindness, your respect, your unwavering love. You gave me the freedom to be myself, and in doing so, you gave me the world. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the sun set one more time over the mountains Bennett had once called home. The house around them was quiet now, their children and grandchildren back to their own lives, but it was a peaceful quiet, full of love and memories. Bennett died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 80. Katherine woke to find him beside her, his face calm and unmarked by pain. She held his hand and cried, mourning the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. Their children gathered for the funeral, along with what seemed like the entire town. People spoke of Bennett's kindness, his strength, his wisdom. They talked about how devoted he had been to his family, how he had helped so many people over the years. But it was Katherine who gave the final words, standing by his grave with dry eyes and a steady voice. My husband once told me that books were windows into other lives, other ways of seeing the world. He learned that from his mother, and I learned it from mine. Bennett and I bonded over that shared love of stories, of words, of the magic that happens when someone reads aloud and brings a tale to life. She looked out at the assembled crowd. Some people thought my love of reading was a fault, a flaw that made me unsuitable for real life. But Bennett saw it as a gift, something to be treasured and shared. He asked me to read to him nightly, and in doing so, he gave me permission to be fully myself. That acceptance, that love, was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. She placed a book on his coffin, one of the first she had read to him all those years ago. Rest well, my love, and know that every word I ever read to you was a declaration of love, a promise that I saw you and valued you just as clearly as you saw and valued me. Katherine lived another 5 years after Bennett's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days in her book room, reading and remembering, writing down the story of her life for future generations. She wanted them to know how it had all begun, with a young woman who loved books and a mountain man who loved listening to her read. When she died peacefully at the age of 82, her family found her in her chair by the window, a book open in her lap and a smile on her face. They buried her beside Bennett, under the spreading oak tree they had planted together when they first built the house. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, her children had these words carved. She read too many books, her father complained. The mountain man said she could read to him nightly, and in those nightly readings, they found a love that lasted a lifetime. The house Katherine and Bennett had built remained in the family for generations, passing from child to grandchild to great-grandchild. The book room was preserved exactly as Katherine had left it, becoming a sort of shrine to her memory and her love of literature. Family members would gather there for special occasions, and someone would always read aloud, continuing the tradition that had started so many years ago by a river in Arizona territory. The books Katherine had collected, some of them now rare and valuable, stayed on those shelves. But the family also kept adding new volumes, ensuring that the library grew and changed with the times. They established a scholarship in Katherine's name for young women pursuing education, and they donated funds to keep the Marysville Library she had helped found running and thriving. Bennett's legacy lived on too, in the wilderness skills he had taught his children and grandchildren, in the values of hard work and integrity he had modeled. His descendants became teachers, scouts, engineers, and ranchers, all of them carrying forward the lessons he had imparted about treating people with respect and valuing substance over appearance. But perhaps the greatest legacy Katherine and Bennett left was the example of their love. In a time when marriages were often practical arrangements, when women had few choices and fewer rights, they had built something extraordinary. They had created a partnership based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection. They had proven that the right person would love you for who you truly were, not who they wanted you to be. Their story was passed down through the generations, taking on an almost mythical quality. The tale of the bookish young woman and the mountain man who appreciated her intelligence became a family legend, a reminder that love could be found in unexpected places if you were brave enough to reach for it. And on quiet evenings, when family gathered in that old house beneath the oak trees, someone would inevitably pull down one of Katherine's books and begin to read aloud. And for those few moments, as the words filled the air, it was almost as if Katherine and Bennett were there again, sitting by the fire, sharing stories and love in equal measure, proving that some connections transcend even death itself. The end of Katherine and Bennett's story was not an ending at all, but rather a beginning that echoed forward through time. Every time someone opened a book and began to read, every time a person chose love over convenience or acceptance over criticism, the spirit of their romance lived on. In the oak-shaded cemetery where they were buried, visitors still came to pay their respects. Young couples would stand by their graves, reading the inscription and marveling at the beauty of a love that had lasted through 4 decades of challenges and triumphs. Some would leave books as offerings, small paperbacks or leather-bound volumes, creating little piles of literature that the groundskeeper would collect and donate to the library Katherine had helped establish. Their descendants flourished across California and beyond, carrying within them the DNA of that remarkable union between the educated merchant's daughter and the mountain man with a poet's soul. They became doctors and artists, soldiers and teachers, activists and entrepreneurs. But regardless of their paths, they all knew the story of how their family had begun, with books and bravery and the willingness to choose love over fear. The mountain cabin, where Katherine had spent her first winter as Bennett's wife, eventually crumbled back into the earth, reclaimed by the wilderness that had sheltered it. But the memories of that place remained vivid in family stories, a symbol of the sacrifice and dedication that had marked Katherine and Bennett's early days together. Some of the more adventurous descendants would hike up into those mountains, searching for the spot where the cabin had stood, wanting to connect with the place where their family story had truly begun. The house in Marysville stood for over a century, weathering storms and earthquakes, fires and floods. When it finally became too expensive to maintain, the family made the difficult decision to donate it to the local historical society, which turned it into a museum celebrating the pioneer women of California. Katherine's book room became the centerpiece of the exhibit, her carefully curated library a testament to the importance of education and literature on the frontier. School children would tour the museum, wide-eyed as they learned about life in the 1880s. They would see Katherine's books, some of them still bearing her handwritten notes in the margins. They would hear recordings of family members reading some of her favorite passages, keeping alive the tradition she and Bennett had started. And they would learn that being different, being passionate about something others dismissed, could actually be a strength rather than a weakness. The love letters Bennett had written to Katherine during his trips into the mountains were discovered in a trunk in the attic and published in a small volume by one of their great-great-granddaughters who had become a writer. The letters revealed a side of Bennett that few outside his family had known, showing his eloquence and depth of feeling. They became minor classics, studied in university courses about frontier literature, and used in documentaries about the American West. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Katherine and Bennett's legacy came not from their descendants or historians or museums, but from the countless ordinary people whose lives they had touched. The families Bennett had guided safely across the mountains, who lived because of his skill and dedication. The children Katherine had taught to read, opening up worlds of possibility for them. The neighbors they had helped during hard times, the strangers they had welcomed to their table, the community they had helped build through their quiet example of decency and love. These people, and their descendants, carried forward the values Katherine and Bennett had embodied. They treated education as a treasure rather than a burden. They valued character over appearance, substance over style. They remembered that the person who truly loves you will celebrate your passions rather than criticize them, will build you up rather than tear you down. And so the story that began with a frustrated father complaining that his daughter read too many books, and a mountain man offering to let her read to him nightly, became something larger than just one couple's romance. It became a parable about acceptance, about finding your tribe, about the transformative power of being truly seen and valued by another person. In the end, Katherine Collins Thorne had indeed read too many books by her father's standards. But by doing so, she had educated herself beyond the narrow confines of her world. She had developed the imagination to dream of a different life and the courage to reach for it. She had found a partner who appreciated her mind as much as her beauty, who supported her growth rather than trying to limit it. And Bennett Thorne, the mountain man who had lived so much of his life alone, had found in Katherine someone who understood that strength and sensitivity could coexist. She had seen past his rough exterior to the educated, thoughtful man his mother had raised him to be. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a love that enriched not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. Their story proved that the most meaningful connections often happen in unexpected ways, between unlikely people, in places where conventional wisdom says they should not work. It showed that taking a chance on love, even when the odds seem long and the path uncertain, can lead to rewards beyond imagining. And it reminded generations of readers that books are never just books. They are portals to other worlds, teachers of empathy and understanding, bridges between people who might otherwise never connect. Katherine's father had been wrong when he complained about her reading. Those books had not ruined her for real life. Instead, they had prepared her for it, teaching her to hope and dream and believe in possibilities. When Bennett had said she could read to him nightly, he had given her more than just an audience for her passion. He had given her permission to be fully herself, intellectually and emotionally. And in accepting that gift, in building a life around those nightly readings and the intimacy they created, Katherine and Bennett had written their own story, one that would be read and remembered long after they were gone. It was a story of love, yes, but also of respect and partnership. of two people who chose each other freely and then worked every day to honor that choice, of a relationship built on conversation and shared interests, on quiet evenings and spoken words, on the magic that happens when two souls truly connect. And it was a story that, unlike so many tales of the Old West, ended not in violence or tragedy but in peace and fulfillment. Katherine and Bennett had their struggles, certainly, but they faced them together. They built something lasting in a time and place where nothing was certain. They created a family that would flourish for generations, all because a mountain man understood that a woman who loved books was not flawed but gifted, and a young woman had the courage to choose love over security. Their story, beginning with books and ending with legacy, remained forever a testament to the power of acceptance, the beauty of intellectual partnership, and the enduring strength of a love built on seeing and celebrating each other's truest selves. And in that, it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth reading aloud to those we love, just as Katherine once read to Bennett on those long-ago evenings when their life together was just beginning.